So Vikram and I are going to hold you back from lunch, is what's going to happen here. So as Yagna said, Vikram's obviously coming with a wealth of knowledge, frontline stories from the battlefield of building startups. So the way that we're going to run this session is I'm just going to ask for stories. And from last night, I have learned that Vikram's a great storyteller. He has shorts, he has long books, he has all sorts of things. So we're going to talk about some stories of examples of things that he has seen as how value has been built at startups. And I'm going to encourage all of you to think about a question, right, to really get to the depth of Vikram's experience and not just limit it to my 4 questions or 5 questions that I'm going to ask Vikram. So please think about, some kind of strategic value capture problem that you might be facing at your startup. And let's collectively pick Vikram's brain to see if he's seen this before or he has any suggestions for us from strategies that you've already encountered or, think can help you. Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? Does that sound good?
Since I'm not sure exactly which ones you're going to do, that's fine.
Yeah, but you told me you would answer the question, do you want to? So we'll start there.
Yeah, I told her that, like any experienced speaker, I'll answer the question I want to hear.
But I'm going to ask the question sort of in a little bit of segmented way. And, and this title is kind of captured around IP. And to me, this session is about how do you've done the science, you have the invention, you know that there is a better performance or a better feature or something that how this is going to change or address a very large market. You have decided to set up a company, right? And, there's the thing that, I make this thing, I sell it, right? That's one, and obviously you have to sell in order to build value into the technology that you are deciding to commercialize. But in such technical companies, there is also intellectual property, right? So, that is another way or a parallel way of also building value, right? So can we start with, I have a technology, there are many different applications, what's your advice to an entrepreneur in that situation? You talked about, a patenting strategy, perhaps with different parts of this, looking at it more sectional way. What's the story that you have from them?
Okay, let me get started. And if I'm not going quite the direction you want, then...
You'll stop you.
Yeah, jog me, don't stop me. Okay. So intellectual property really comes in two buckets. People think of it as only as patents, but it's not. Know-how is also intellectual property. It is intellectual property that you chose not to patent. And that whole concept of when do you patent something and when do you hold it as know-how is a longer topic. But in the end, a patent is only a license to litigate. That's all it is. And so there are sort of rules of thumb of when you keep something as know-how and when you patent. So that's point one. And by the way, know-how, the easiest way know-how you lose it is on 2 legs, when people leave. Okay. So that's the whole thing which we won't get into, but let's say you have patent. Now, in the deep tech sector, deep science sector, by definition, it is new and very different. It's probably more important in the deep science sector to have IP. Well, you always have IP, otherwise you're not going to, you should do something new. But it's probably more important in this sector than it is on just any other form of innovation. Now, what Ritu was asking me is that, okay, let me pick up one other thing she said, that if you have technology and you have IP, what sort of challenges might you face on scaling or really on where to begin? See, one of the, let me talk about something called, let's say it's platform IP. It's intellectual property in area that's applicable in about 3 or 4, I'll call them market verticals. It's really important for a startup to get cash flow. So it's really important to pick the vertical that is the easiest to penetrate. And almost no deep science is easy to penetrate because it's so brand new. So, and one of the problems faced in penetrating this is that there's a difference between need and want. Okay, so usually when we develop something brand new like that, you are satisfying a need, but unfortunately, it may not be a want. Okay, in other words, the client saying it's like in Texas they have a saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay, which is a little ungrammatical but accurate. Okay, and that is more prevalent than one would realize. So, nothing short about answers I'm given at this point, unfortunately. But if you got multiple verticals you can go for, then go for the ones that easiest to penetrate, get cash flow, and then attack the other verticals.
So can you give us an example of somebody you mentored or somebody you ran across? I mean, you don't have to go depth of the technology. A little bit about the decision making. I mean, I did hear you say that, okay, pick the most lucrative place. You don't have to spread yourself thin. Is there an example that comes to mind?
Yeah. So one of the reason I'm thinking is what's public and what's not. One of the startups that I advise, I think it's public, is in the geothermal space. Now, geothermal energy, production of it is a valid and important thing. By the way, I have a pet peeve in this sector. Let's not talk about renewables. Let's talk about carbon-free. And if you want to argue that point, then we will go there. Okay? Because I don't know if geothermal is renewable or not, but sure it's carbon-free. But in that case, they had an intermediate application doing exactly what they were doing for producing geothermal energy, but they could use it for energy storage. Okay? And we agreed that energy storage, and it's come up in the previous panel, was probably more of a near-term want, forget need, was more of a near-term want by utilities than a new form of energy, no matter how much carbon it had or didn't have. And so they swung to offering that first, because again, it's a focus thing. A startup can't really deal with multiple verticals. So they swung to attacking that one, and by the way, that worked. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone have a question? Does anyone have a platform technology here and sort of grappling with, limited resources, obviously? I can't really see very well. The light's like directly in my face. All the way at the back.
Yeah, there's one. While he's going up there, let me make one other point, that if you have a platform technology with multiple verticals, there is an IP strategy that you can follow to address that.
Hi, I'm Shiva. I'm a researcher with an AI background, now building my own startup. Question on IP is, a lot of IP strategy seems to be predicated on the trade landscape of the last several decades. With geopolitics unraveling, do you see that IP protection will become less valuable, especially because countries choose to trample over it in preference for the capabilities to actually build something and deploy it?
Yeah, well, in the IP sector, at least for the moment, it's holding. I mean, the agreements are holding. Okay, there is it's, for example, whenever you apply in any country, there's something called the Patent Cooperation Treaty, PCT. For the moment, it's holding up. Okay, I say for the moment because weird things are happening in the world today on nationalisms. Okay, but for the moment, it's holding up. So the Patent Cooperation Treaty does respect patenting from different countries, and there are rules on which it's handled. So at this point, I would say it's not yet a problem. But yeah, that's what I'd say. Yeah.
Now, Vikram, you had an interesting story of giving away your patents for free. Could you tell us more about
Remind me not to have dinner with her and tell her stuff.
But it's the opposite, right? You're trying to protect everything, but it was strategically the right thing to actually give it away for free. Tell us more about that.
Yes. I could, but here's what I'm going to do. It's something that we did. It worked. But I'm going to deal in hypotheticals in explaining this because I don't think it went. No, I know it didn't go public. Okay, so let's deal in hypotheticals. let's say that you have a startup that is doing something that if you don't take particular care, let's say you could produce a biohazard. Just throw that out, okay? A serious biohazard. You're doing it right, okay? And it's not going to happen. Somebody else sees that you're succeeding and comes along the same lines, and let's not worry about intellectual property for now, and they also start to do it. And let's say they had a situation in which they didn't handle it right. So now, what do you do? The point where what do you do is you have the IP, you could go alone, you are the leader, but you could take the extravagant step of helping them not have the problem. That means you're actually actively helping a competitor. Why would you do that? You would do that because if you do not, in a particular situation like that, which is an extremely hazardous situation, you're the leader, but you may be leader of nothing left behind because the public may not allow it to continue, and not because you screwed up, because they screwed up. In that situation, you simply share it, and it really doesn't matter if there's one more competitor because you are the leader anyway. So it's an unusual situation. It happened, but for the greater good of the market and for the fact that you want the market to continue to exist. This is not usual, okay? This only applies to really hazardous situations. Anyway.
And you had a rule of three. Want to tell us a bit more about that?
So because you're building on what I just said, you don't care about one more competitor. The rule of three, and I believe C.K. Prahlad somewhere in the US actually spoke about it at one point. For me, the rule of three is this. I don't care if I got two competitors. I'm a startup. I've done something really great. It's actually happened to us once that that actually myself, not somebody I advised, where we were a startup and it was a disruptive technology. It changed the game. And the incumbents whose technology we were displacing didn't want to do these kind of things because they were making a lot of margin from what they were doing, and we were going to displace it. But when we worked, they followed to do it, and my board went ballistic, and I said, don't worry about it. And here was the point. The rule of three is one point, but the other is if you're a startup and an established player copies you, it's tremendous. Okay, because they make your market for you, okay, because they're saying, oh, XYZ is doing it, so we were doubtful about these young people, but if they're doing it, then must be right. And it works. And then you can still retain the lead. And in our case, we did. So we retained the lead, and you can do that for about 2 competitors, maybe 3, not 10, okay, because there's enough, especially if it's a big market.
So essentially you are leveraging, well, in this case, their incumbent already established their credibility to say, yes, this is something that we should consider.
Yeah, and the credibility of established enterprises is huge. For example, I worked for a startup that got bought by a big company, and I'm going slowly because I'm trying to remember what's public. And things happened, people left, and so our reliability went down. But we were the gold standard. So our customers waited for it to come back up. This is what is brand, I call it brand equity. Okay, if you got a brand and you got the trust, market will tolerate a failure for a while. It really will. And that happened. I don't know what your question was, but did it get in the right area?
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I was just going to ask the audience here, right? Anyone here want to share something or ask, about the competition or sort of worrying about competition? And you're talking about this sort of rule of three, worrying about incumbents actually coming in and sort of putting much more resources and the brand equity And, we heard Kedar talk about how, as Philips, I'm scouting for technology. I have the distribution. I have a lot of things, whereas what you have is just the technology. Anyone here with a question around something like that?
Yeah, hi, Ritu. Hi, this is Renuka from Bioprime. We have a tricky situation in IP. So we work with biologicals. Some of them are microbes-based. Microbes cannot be patented, but we as in the whole ecosystem, spends a lot of time in trying to isolate, discover these new kinds of microbes, these new kinds of strains. Now, when we make a product of it and put it in the market, literally anyone can get that microbe and have access to the microbe. So can you suggest what would be the ideal way to going around protecting it? One, of course, is doing something to the formulation and protecting the formulation. But then is there any merit in trying to protect the strain in itself?
Okay, protecting formulations in the biochemical space is not easy. It's called composition of matter, and composition of matter claims are tough, okay, because there's too much water under that bridge. Probably the best way to protect it is in the application and make it as broad as you can, okay, in the claim structure. But your best bet in that situation is to claim in the application space, not in the composition of materials. But you can try. If you succeed, great. I have found that composition of matter patents are hard to get. So go for the application and make it as broad as you can.
A mic in a minute.
Yeah. So a related question to that, you were mentioning about how to protect patents or have an IP strategy when there's a platform technology. Could you talk a bit more about it?
Yeah. So each country is a bit different. I said there was a PCT and all that is true, but the rules are more or less the same, but there are small differences, okay? The US has a structure which allows for more latitude to answer your question. So in the US, I'll say the US because even startups here do patent in the US in order to access the market. So I'll tell you the US part and then the India part. In the US part, there's a mechanism called continuations, okay? So you can apply for a patent, and at the time they say, okay, you can have it, which is called an allowance. Before you let it go through, you are allowed to make changes to your claim structure. Because in the intervening 3 years, you know more, okay? You know better why it even works, or why it works better. And so you're allowed to file something called a continuation, which is really a new patent, with more claims based on the original specification, or there are some nuances, let's not go there. So, and the drug industry in particular uses that very effectively, because drugs take a long time, and that was discussed a little bit earlier, to come out because the regulations and all that, it takes a long time. And your patent is only for 17 years. So they use that in particular effect, which is you can file something which is called a continuation, and it could be in a space that you have now realized is a market that you didn't think of before. Okay? All right. So, but the basic technology applies to different verticals. You had patented, your claims had been in the vertical that you are most familiar with, but in the remaining 3 years, now you know there's another vertical that's pretty fertile ground, but you don't have any claims in it. You can now now. What can you do in India and in most other countries in the world? You can do what's called divisionals, okay? And a divisional is where and sometimes you can play games to make them force you to divide, but you do that almost from the beginning, okay? And divide means the original patent application now 4 patents or something, okay? The divisionals can now target each vertical. And why do all this? Let's say that you have a really terrific technology and it has 4 market segments. There's no way a startup is going to serve all the segments, so you'd probably want a license. Okay, and licensing is a good way to get cash flow And then they have the problem with capex capital generation and so forth. A divisional strategy is really cool for that, because now your one divisional can be licensed to them as a patent, as opposed to if you didn't do any divisionals, then you would say, okay, I'll give you the main patent with the field of use circumscribing. It doesn't feel as good. If a divisional, your own patent has more value, or at least perceived value. So these are basically patenting should be in support of your business strategy. And so anyway, yeah.
No, absolutely. Very critical point, right? So you may want to, I mean, as a startup, you're resource limited, right? So for you to generate value, there may be a particular sector or subsector, just because of the capex requirement, the scale, et cetera, that you need. It may be better to license it out. And what you said, the perceived value of you having a patent that you're giving someone to license out.
Yeah, let me underline that point. I mean, the bandwidth thing. If you have the ability, then try for divisionals and get it licensed so you get cash flow. And it works. Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears. I know there are more questions, but I'm sure that Yagna will kill me if I keep going, or we may lose lunch completely. But I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and the past, Shailaja talked about, and Rishi had a question about scale, etc. Right. So I actually want to pivot over to some strategies away from IP, right? Essentially here. So if we, as a startup, again, and you were alluding to this with, the divisional patents, etc., you have to make some choices as to, how do I prove to the world that this actually works, right? So there are two parts to that question, right? I think one part of that question is, I don't have any brand equity. I have just, unless I'm some famous Nobel laureate or somebody like that walking off here, I don't have any brand equity, so I don't believe you. And by definition, we're talking about a new disruptional technology. So it's not like, oh yeah, I looked at this from vendor X and, you're vendor Y and you're giving me a better solution here, right? So I have to build credibility here, right? Any stories on strategy or sort of building credibility, right? And the other is I have to match the market, right? I have to connect, I don't want that thing that you've demonstrated in the lab. What do I do with it as a customer, right? But I may have talked to the wrong customer, right? And, and they are like, I can't talk to you till you give me 1 million tons of this, right? So, navigating some of these, and I know you have some interesting stories. Maybe we start with the bit about, convincing somebody, how do I take a non-believing customer and make them a customer for something that, you also brought up need and want, right? I mean, It's not there, so it's not a need. It's not a want, right, basically.
Right, and exactly. This is the whole need-want thing, okay? If you're doing anything really disruptive, it's not a want, it's a need. And traversing that is hard. So, we faced that once. It was a disruptive technology, something that we were doing. And see, any new thing tends to fail a lot, okay? It's just one of those things. If it's so brand new that, and so you need your customers to have some patience, and that's hard to get, okay? And so you might get it with one customer, but it's hard to get in a broad scale. The question of whether then comes a point where things have improved, and you are not going to be failing. You know that. Your customer doesn't necessarily believe you, okay? Because they've seen it fail before. So now you have an asymmetry. So when this happened to me, I said, what am I going to do? Because then I'm not going to get more jobs given to us because they don't actually they have belief but not trust. Anyways, it's a very ephemeral thing. So what I did was I offered them insurance. Okay, I said, if we fail, then we will cover all the costs of replacement, all the ancillary costs you incurred by our failure. And you will pay me an insurance premium. And if that happens, then so they're thinking it's going to fail, and so we will cover their costs. And so I could justify a fairly high insurance premium. Again, I'm thinking it's not okay. For a year and a half after we did that, a very high double-digit % of our EBIT and income earnings before income tax, a very high double-digit % was my insurance premiums. Okay. About that point, some of the customers realized that they're paying a lot of insurance for something that's not breaking. That's okay. So they switched, they stopped paying insurance, but they bought more product. So it's the concept for this, and look it up. It's called information asymmetry, and I'm not going to go into it. It's a concept in economics that won the Nobel Prize by George Akerlof and Michael Spence in 1998 or something. And I happened to read that, and it works. Okay, and it works in all walks of life. But in this particular one, offering insurance when you are sure it's not going to fail and they think it is, it works.
No, I love that story. I love the part about, this being a significant portion of your EBIT.
It's not the same as open source, okay?
No, it's not open source. Yeah. You're just saying, I'm taking, I know that there is no risk. Exactly. You think that there is a risk. Great. Let's I'm ready to underwrite that and pay you for it, basically, right? So, I think it's a belief in your product, actually, sort of coming through and you manifesting that to your customer.
By the way, one other little pointer. One way to get customer trust is that when you have failures, open book. Total open book, work with the client in figuring out what the reasons were. Don't hide anything. That trust builds you huge brand equity.
That makes sense. Anybody have a story or a question around that where they've had a challenge with customers or just not believing what they do? Sure.
Hi, I'm Rahul from Evo Motors. So essentially we design, develop battery packs, mobility. That's our whole stint. Talking about the story, we supply it to the defense currently. And so happened to be that there's a requirement of helicopter engine starter units. So essentially, if you look at how helicopters start, in any airbase, they have a diesel generator that they run and they start huge things, right? So the issue was for one chopper to, let's say, go from Ladakh base to Siachen, they had to plan 3 months in advance because they had to send this whole thing through the road and all that. So we built our battery pack, lithium-ion based again, fully designed, developed right here and all that. So there's something called DGAQA approval. It takes anyone close to 2.5 years to get through that. It's a very rigorous thing, defense, right? So we understood that very well, thank God. We could pass it within 9 months. The problem was right there. So because we got it in 9 months, we went to Leh. From the station master head to the colonel, the captain, I said, boss, how can I believe yours? Like, I know you've done through 9 months and that's paperwork, but conditions here are worse, minus 20, minus 25 degrees. So we said, just give us one chance. Let's prove it to you. The requirement was of 6 engine starts. Each turbine engine takes about 45 to 50 seconds to start up from zero, 1500 amps at minus 25 degrees. We were able to give 7 engine starts. So that's when they realized that, okay, we can trust this to start off. So the time for us to prove it took us about 9 months and make them understand that, okay, you need to do it step by step. And because it is our defense, their approach toward things are very redundancy based. It's not about tech. It's more about, I don't care if you're the latest tech, is it going to work for 10 years? Right? So I think that's something that we learned on the way. And I think correlates to what you guys were talking about.
No, thank you for that. That's great, right? I mean, you're basically saying your bar is 5, I'm showing you 10. So don't ask me about 5, right? I think I have another example that I've seen through our portfolio, and this is more on the medical side. We have medical regulations in India, but the medical community doesn't necessarily put the same weight on it. So even though your market is India, you may have to sort of benchmark to a regulation that your customer is more comfortable with, even though that may not be the requirement or the law of the land here to sort of do that. Vikram, to my next question, right? And, as an investor, capital and the return on capital is a super critical thing here, right? We can all talk about solving great problems, but at the end of the day, people want their money back. So that's how this all works, right? And a lot of companies like this, there's a lot of non-revenue periods. There is the question of what scale that I have to raise the money for. Because as I said earlier, if I have a customer who wants 1 million liters or whatever, I have to build to that scale. If I then supply to some small guy on the side, that doesn't give me the credibility to actually then ultimately get there and get those orders. Tell me more about how, an example that you've lived through where figuring out where to land, where I'm balancing many things here, right? Like, we had a discussion earlier. The vendor's not going to take you seriously if you want to buy 5 units and, they are selling 50 million. How do I, as a startup, come to that balance? It's hard to raise capital. No one's giving me $100 million to set up this plant. And, Sheila just spoke about, we've never done it before, right? So raising capital for something you've never done before doesn't really happen that easily.
Yeah, so that's pretty broad, but let me attack the question in a couple of different ways. If in deep tech usually displaces something that exists, okay, it's very hard. People will not easily replace something they're already doing, especially if it's a high capex object. Okay, so for example, one of the things I work is in the carbon-free steel space. So if you come up with an idea of a carbon-free steel, and you realize that more than 50% of the iron-making plants in the world are amortized only for about half of their life, then nobody's going to is lightly amortized. They're not going to replace it. So one strategy would be to make it carbon-free within the context of what they're doing. Help them make it carbon-free rather than replace it, okay, and then eventually replace it. That's one way. The other is generally, it is useful to get a strategic partner pretty early. Where a strategic partner is an entity that would be a client later and is already a large entity. Now, large entities don't easily take to disruptive technologies, but let's say you found someone who is prepared to do it, then it's pure gold, okay, because then your early market is already taken care of. In the early portions of your output, it's already being absorbed by the strategic partner because they're skin in the game. They have whatever it is, 15-20% of your equity. So they have a reason. See, when I was in Halliburton, when I was CTO, I also invested, okay? And so I faced that very directly, that when we often invested in startups that we could then absorb. And so I was a strategic partner. Okay, but
I want to build $1 billion company. I want to go to IPO. I do not want to be a business unit inside Halliburton, right? So I'm going to get eaten up alive there.
And no, agreed. But you could still use Halliburton or equivalent Tata Iron Steel as your first client. Okay, so keep in mind, and to do that, keep their equity under 20%. Okay, but we won't go into the practicalities of these. Okay, where they don't have. Anyway, so, but yes, so there is a risk of a strategic partner over guiding you in the direction you go, and so you may not get to where you wanted to go. But there are ways to solve that by not allowing it to go over a certain percentage.
Control of what controls they have.
Yeah.
But I think, Vikram, you had a story for me about sort of where you were an advisor, and you kind of helped the company navigate what scale they should kind of build for, right? Like there were choices to be made, right?
Remind me again what?
Yeah, I think it was a geothermal company, right? And you had, there was a choice of what scale that they should do this at. And they brought you on as an advisor. So, maybe if you could tell us how those choices, what was the battle about, and how, obviously you helped make those choices, but how did that problem look and how did it get solved?
Okay, let me make the question and answer a little more generic. Any startup for scaling faces practicalities, and it's very difficult for startups to have compositionally in their founding team people who know much about the next stage of scale up. Okay, so in that case, it's good to have a small advisory board or certain advisors, but carefully chosen to plug the gaps you don't have. Okay, and one of the gaps is what Ritu was talking about. Apparently, I told her was that she asked me how many startups that I'm advising right now. I said, okay. The number.
Catchy question.
And it's a question my wife also asked. Okay, and she said, "You're retired. What are you doing?" Anyway, so I said it's 9, but really 3 of them have flown. Okay, they don't need me anymore. So she asked me when they needed you. What's an example when they needed you? So I'll give you that example. It's a geothermal company, a very prominent one right now. And what they needed me for was the nose. Okay, CTOs have noses. Okay, they know what works and what doesn't. But in this particular case, what they needed me for was to assess how big the pilot needed to be. Okay, and I was able to say with considerable certainty that the pilot could be just this big, not that much smaller, not much bigger, and yet could scale 30x afterwards. Okay, that is knowing that at the right stage is important, and you can only get it from outside.
So how do I find the nose, Vikram? I mean, they found you, right? So I don't know. Maybe we can take somebody from the audience and some challenge that you're having, if you're willing to share. And how do I hunt for that nose, right? It's not like people are hanging out saying, I do that.
Yeah, but it's not just in scale. Yeah. First of all, you have to know what your potential hurdles are. Okay. Okay. And also you want to know what your likely business model is going to be. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you are working in the space of carbon mitigation, and that you found this wonderful way of capturing carbon from the air. Okay. Let's say. Okay. Or from anything else for that matter. Your business model will have to figure out how much to value that. Okay, you're going to take the carbon price into your EBIT or not? Okay, and depending on where you are, you may or may not succeed in doing that. Then you need an expert. You need somebody who has worked in the space of carbon trading. Okay, on as an advisor, because that is not an amateurish thing. So in each case, you just have to figure out that for scaling, what expertise do you need that you don't have, and you get that from an advisory group.
There's one question here, and it's going to be the last question because, as I said, we're eating into our lunch. But the good thing is Vikram's having lunch with us, so you can ask him questions as long as you let him eat.
Yeah, hi. This is Sai. I'm a founder of Varma Sciences. So we generate solid green hydrogen from microalga. So its cost is 200 per kilogram as compared to gaseous green hydrogen, which is 700 per kilogram. Very nice. We have shown it in sunlight. But the scale is very, very less, 100 ml. Now, how do I answer your question? So this is microalga, which is a scale that I have to do, which it is basically, it can grow anywhere where there is sunlight. So what should I do? How to grade my yardsticks?
Did you understand?
Yeah, he's got, did you say 100 ml is where you are?
Yes.
He's growing these
so
microalgae.
it is in sunlight, but it's just 100 ml.
So he's got a pretty small sample here, right? So he's trying to understand, how do I grade the next leg of my journey? If I have demonstrated this at 100 ml, what should the questions I should be asking myself for what the next scale should be?
Yeah, so then it's almost exactly the example I gave. You need to get an advisor. Okay, see, in general, it's good to have an advisory group, okay, which would be like 3 people, okay? And you pay them in equity. Don't pay them in cash. You don't have cash when you're a startup, okay? So pay them in equity, and there's rules of thumb on how much equity, and I'll tell you on the side, okay? But this is highly specialized because it's almost exactly the same example I gave. What is the scale that you need to go to be believed enough that you will get financing? I don't have expertise in that space, so I'm not going to give you a specific answer on that, but you need to find someone who can.
And I suspect that it also has to which industry that you pick, right? As to where people will believe you, because they have to believe that from that pilot scale, you can go to the larger scale commercially for them to actually buy from you. But if they buy in 1 liters or half liters of what you're doing, then, it
By the
goes
way,
to
if I were you, if in the hydrogen space from whatever it is, shoot for $3 a kilogram. At least try to get there.
Okay, thank you, Vikram. I know you're a wealth of knowledge by asking you how many startups you advise, and I didn't really believe the 9 because I'm sure there's hundreds others that you perhaps officially don't advise, but you still do advise. So Vikram's going to be there at lunch, so please feel free to break his. Feel free to ask him questions, and he's around for later part of the day as well. And let's all get ourselves up to lunch. Yeah. Thank you very much.